Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Greet the Week. I'm Jan Moray, and I'm here with my co-host, Mona Duncan, and we have several other visitors who have joined us already this morning. So welcome, everybody who's here and everyone who's watching us on the replay. Today's topic is the question of evil. Some questions here to think about, to agree and align, or react and rebel. Both produce negative end results. So Mona, I'm confused here. What's going on?
Yeah. Well, the question of evil. More and more we learn of acts of disregard of fellow human beings. And we wonder, how could anyone do anything like that, or what's going on? In a previous talk, I suggested that sometimes we just want to return to the good old days. But the truth is, the facts are, there never have been those good old days, or they weren't as good as we maybe wanted to make them out to be. At least not consistently and not worldwide. I mean, even nationwide, not even here in the good old USA. The story of the very first beings on planet Earth was one of discord and murder and separation, and it has continued to that. So the fact arises about the question of evil, not that it can be answered. And I'm certainly not the one to try to give any kind of an answer, but I do want to look at some insights. And realizing the fact that there is good and evil in all of us, part of that yin-yang. It's part of our inherent nature that is inextricably commingled, that we are good and we're not so good. We're just plain down evil. And it depends on which one we feed. And how do we feed them? It depends on, we feed them through our thoughts, through our actions, through the books we read, the programs we watch, the music we listen to, through everything that it interacts with us. It gets into our being. And then also,
it's kind of interesting when you think about the things that you feed. I mean, I've seen the whole old story of the old Indian story. I can't remember what it is now, about whether you're feeding the good animal or the bad animal in you, but it is, what are you reading about? What are your friends talking about? Which conversations do you get into that you end up going that direction?
Right. I mean, it does influence, because we've looked at the fact that all the, we influence others and others influence us. There's no doubt about that. And so it all boils down to the fact that each one of us has this thing called a free will, whether we acknowledge it or not. Because, sometimes we say, and especially in teaching choice theory, that we choose all of our actions, we choose our thoughts, we choose our behavior. Sometimes we can say, well, I don't either. I wouldn't choose to do that. It just happened. But as we self-evaluate, we can begin to realize that we make more choices than we even realize that we do.
Right.
But in the little intro to it, I made the comment that whether we agree and align with, or whether we resist and rebel, the thing of it is, it's still us. And that both produce negative end results. Because as we begin to agree and align with someone's point of view, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, and we rebel against a point of view, we are limiting our own reality of what we're buying into. And to a degree, it begins to diminish us, and it leads us astray. And it can empower us to be dogmatic about something that doesn't need to be dogmatic about. And so it's thinking about that. Whenever we think our own thoughts, we are choosing empowerment, but we're also choosing to be discriminated. Let me think about this and think about that and see if it matches with where I'm coming from. And then we can be crystal clear on what we're choosing. And we go with it for a while. It goes back to the baby steps that we've talked about before. We go to those baby steps for a while, that we test it, we try it. Again, whether it's aligning and agreeing with or the pushback, we test it for a while to see what the end result is in the long haul. because it's seeing where our thoughts and our actions take us to, not just for today and not just for tomorrow, but in the long haul.
Yeah. And taking a moment to really stop and reflect upon what those what our thoughts and feelings are, and take note of your feelings. If you're starting to feel more and more angry, and say, well, why is that? Maybe I'm reading into some things that aren't really setting well with me. Maybe I should kind of balance that with something else.
Right, exactly. And is this really me that I've bought into? Whichever
Right.
it is, okay? Is it really me? Whether it's dissing someone or whether it's agreeing with or whatever. And so, talking about the books that we read, I wanted to share some thoughts from The Sunflower. If anyone that's on here is familiar with this, it is written by Simone Wiesenthal. And Simone survived several of the Nazi concentration camps.
Oh.
And while there was something that he encountered that just so impacted his life, that was a constant question that he even wrote about it later and asked people what would you have done? And he received, and this whole book, matter of fact, I think it's like the third or fourth printing of it. And in this particular book, there are like 53 people that have answered his question as to from where I'm coming from, what I would have done.
Oh,
That
that's
whenever we
interesting.
face evil, that is just plain evil.
Yeah.
How would you handle it? And I just wanted to kind of look at that a little bit today in our talk.
That sounds good. Why don't you lead us off on that? I'm not familiar with the book, but so we'll all learn something new.
Okay. Well, Simone, like I say, or Simon Simone, was in the concentration camp, and you're familiar with that. I'm hoping everyone is familiar with that, knows something about it, and the horrors and the evils that were exposed there. But he was, already had, I don't know how long, several years whenever this particular incident happened, but they were railed out early in the morning to get out, and they had to tromp into town, going to a school that had been at one time was a school that had been turned into a hospital to care for injured soldiers that were, in the war. And we're talking about the Nazi soldiers, okay?
Yes, right.
And so
right.
they were rousted out to go, and he was walking through the street, and he noticed over on one side that something he had not noticed before, and it was a cemetery that was for Nazi soldiers, and every one of them had a sunflower on the grave. And he looked at that, and it just so incensed him that someone would honor them by planting a sunflower. And even saw butterflies over there, joining in among the sunflowers. And so he went on in, and was in the line and went to the hospital, and they were putting different people in different wards to do different things to take care of. And a nurse pulled him aside, like she looked around to see that no one was watching her, and she pulled him aside. And she pushed him into a room there where there were other soldiers, but one in particular she took him over to, and he was a Secret Service guy. And she told him to sit down, that this guy needed to talk to him. And he was certainly, didn't know what in the world was going on. And the man, the soldier, he was a 22-year-old guy. His name was Carl. And he was there, and he asked him, he says, "Are you a Jew?" And, Simone acknowledged the fact, and the nurse also was there. And anyway, basically, this guy began to tell him his whole life story, and he was seeking forgiveness. He was seeking absolution. And he poured out, and the more the man talked, I mean, it was just that the yin yang, the good bad that was rising up, that was coming up, that was showing itself. I mean, as the man talked, he had wounds all over him. The 22-year-old had wounds all over him, and they were festering, and flies were gathering in them. And Simone, just out of natural human kindness, waved the flies away. And the young man thanked him. And and he was sitting there, and he was so conflicted at how he could have compassion on this guy that he hated, that he also, and how could he be so brash as to ask him to forgive him and others for the evil atrocities, and how the fact that so many of his people were in unmarked graves and they were piled on top of another, and no one put a sunflower on their chest.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that thinking through, and as he and later, you know, the end of the story is that he did not give him freedom. He did not, you know, condone the fact that he was, although he did acknowledge the fact that he saw this person as a very repentant person. And I have here a quote that he writes in the book. He says, "Here was a dying man, a murderer who did not want to be a murderer, who had been made a murderer by a murderous ideology. He was confessing his crime to a man who perhaps tomorrow must die at the hands of these same murderers. Mm. In his confession, there was true repentance, even though he did not admit it in so many words, nor was it necessary, for the way he spoke and the fact that he spoke to me was proof of his repentance."
Yeah.
And it's just realizing how that, you know, all of these things are within all of us. Mm-hmm. And it depends on what we do with it, how we follow through. And so he began to follow through by going back in and just getting up and leaving the young man and going back in and finding, you know, to be with the others and to take care of the duties that the others in his barracks were forced to take care of. And then the very next day, again, that same nurse went back to the thing and she pulled him aside and he had died.
Oh.
The young man had died.
Yeah.
And he spoke about, you know, again, that dichotomy, that the hate and the anger, as well as the compassion and the feelings for him. And then I don't know how much long it was afterward, but when the war was over and Simone, he had no family left, he had no home left, and he began to work with the different agencies, NATO and so forth, and brought to justice 1,100 Nazis.
Oh, wow.
But in the process of that, and, you know, immediately thereafter, he was walking through the streets and he remembered the address of the young man's mother, because he had told him about his life and about how his dad had rejected him because he had become a Hitler Youth. And how he didn't get as many letters from his mom, but he knew his mom always loved him. Anyway, so Simone found himself walking through the streets, and he remembered that young man's mother's address. And he was drawn to go see her.
Yeah.
And he knocked on her door. And I mean, hers was one of the houses, one of the buildings that had been destroyed. And there was, well, I mean, it was partially destroyed. There was things that needed to be fixed. And anyway, she opened the door and he just simply said to her, he says, "I met your son."
Oh, I'm getting chills.
I know. And he told her, he said, "He spoke highly of you." And she invited him in, and he went in. And it was that, and he could not, as much as he kind of inside wanted that, if you only knew what your son turned out and what he confessed of me that he was personally taking part of, but she could not bring herself to do that. He could not bring himself to do that. And I just thought, evil is so real. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that everyone here has seen a time when, you know, you sensed it.
Yeah.
But certainly in the reading of this, and in books and in movies and various things that have been on true events, I mean, it's a very palpable emotion.
Well, and the fact that they recruit these kids when they're teenagers and at a very impressionable age. It's kind of interesting you bringing that up now, because over the weekend somehow we got on the discussion. You know, my mother was from Greece, and I remember her talking about the German occupation of Greece and how much she just despised the Germans. But apparently 2 of her first cousins ended up on the side of or sympathizing with the Germans, and got into some activities and things like that. But they were like 15 and 17 years old when this happened. And I remember my father just being so against these family members of my mom's, because they participated in that. But you think about how young they were and when that happened, and then you get involved in something like that, and then as you see more about what's going on and you get past all of the, I hate to call it propaganda, but all of the what they're saying and how they're making it sound like it's a good thing and it's for the betterment of the people, it's easy to get caught up in it. And then once you see what's really happening, you're stuck in what you do. Because if you say, I don't believe in this anymore, the consequences can be pretty grave.
Right, exactly. And so when you don't, then do we have the courage, but we do have, if we'll just give ourselves credit for it, to be dissed by your friends that, you got in with it and you begin to realize, I have bitten into something that is not in keeping with my internal good side. I bit into something and it fostered that internal evil side. But now I'm beginning to realize how terrible it is, and how we can begin to extract ourselves from that. And so one of the better ways to do that is to look through someone who went there himself, and that's Viktor Frankl.
Right.
And in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he talks about the fact that, and I have the quote here right directly from it. One of the main features of human existence is the capacity to rise above such conditions, to grow beyond them, provided we survive. There's so many things that we are involved in our country and in this whole world that it's not necessarily a matter of survival, although in places there are.
Yeah.
What he becomes within the limits of endowment and environment he has made out of himself. In the concentration camps, for example, in the living laboratories and the tested ground, we watched and witnessed some of our comrades behaving like swine while others behaved like saints. Man has the potentiality within himself, which he can actualize depending on decisions and depending on decisions, not conditions.
Yeah.
It's not the condition, it's the decision that we make. And can it be difficult? Yeah. And I think about, working with the prisoners again and again. You can get away from that. You do have it within you. You can't hold on to that friendship. And there was a time that when I did tutoring for students, and there was this young man that I was helping him, and they were on current events or communism and socialism, and he was so for it. This chicken, having a chicken in every pot. He thought that was just the ideal way to go.
Right.
And it sounds so good. It's that ideology that you can. And sometimes we think, well, that if we just diss someone else, it kind of feels good to have one up to them. That it's so destructive for us all the way around, and it begins to lead toward evil. And so Frankl, he
was amazing. I don't know if everybody here has read his book, but it is so moving to listen to him talk about what all he went through, and the fact that somebody survived all of what he went through. It's just amazing to even. You think, put yourself in that position. Would I have been able to make it? I doubt it.
And not only survive. Surviving is still breathing and being alive. But not only to survive, but to thrive as a human being.
Yeah.
And to become successful, was already successful and stayed successful. And to realize that you have to turn that suffering into a human accomplishment. And there isn't any of us that does not have degrees of suffering, whether it's self-imposed or not.
Right.
And a lot of it very much is self-imposed. And it's because our egos, I was listening to a Oprah the other night, and I've looked back through, I take notes on everything that speaks to me. And anyway, I can't find in my notes anywhere. Anyway, but she was talking to this guy. He was a pastor in New York, and he said that you know how we think of the angel on one side and the devil on the other.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he says that the angel is our soul, and that the devil on the other one is our ego. And the more I think about that, that just so makes sense.
Yeah.
That the angel is our soul talking to us, saying, you know, you're better than that. And the ego is that devil talking to us, saying, oh, but you'd look so pretty if you had that car. You'd be thought so much of if you had that, this, that, you know, that whatever. That we often give into that. And the more I thought about that, you know what? A humiliated ego is a lethal weapon.
Oh, wow.
No matter what caused that ego to get blown up out of proportion. You know, we need that ego in there for us to determine what may, you know, I mean, it has its purpose, just like the soul has its purpose.
Right.
But not when it becomes dominant.
Yeah. Because you get so much into believing yourself and believing what that what you're doing is right, that you're just not listening to anything else, and you're not observing what's going on around you until somebody, you know, puts a needle into that bubble that you've created around you, and it all comes crashing down.
Yeah. And as Wayne Dyer defines ego as edging God out.
Oh, wow.
We're not willing to listen to our soul. We're not willing to listen to that higher self even.
Mona, what was, you said something about the ego of a couple of paragraphs ago. The ego of, what was it? Something about the ego turned evil, or you didn't say, it didn't say evil.
A humiliated ego is a deadly weapon.
Well, Hitler was a failure in society. Hitler was. Do you mind if I interject something now about at least one author that was reviewed a book about anti-Semitism recently? And they said that Jews were good at competitive advancement in Europe. They were good. I mean, they couldn't farm because they had no land. So they were good in competitive advancement, and better than the rest of the people in Germany or in Austria or in other countries. And there was all this anti-Semitism because people just didn't perform the way Jews did. So it was a vicious jealousy of, like you said, humiliated egos.
Right, exactly. And you know, I've been thinking about that, and I look at all of our different, you know, our white people, our brown people, our Jewish people, our all different kinds of people, and we can look at them and stereotyping, but it can still be a type of an anti against, even though it's a stereotyping. It can still be a negative, even if, you know, like, I mean, we're always talking about soul music and soul food and soul this, because we've all got a soul. But maybe we think that, you know, one is more agile and dancing and one is what, but so what? We all have, and even if it is in a line with color or where it was originally came from, it's still that special talent that we can learn from each other. If someone does it, then it's capable that we can do it too. And that's for the good or for the evil. Yeah. And having that competitive advantage. I had a former pastor one time that was recommended a Jewish lawyer. He says, if you want somebody that's going to really help, go to a Jewish lawyer. Now that can be taken as a negative, but it was intended as a positive.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
And that evil can come whenever we just get it, whenever we take it wrong. And how do we know if we take it wrong? Well, it's by thinking about it. And what does it do to us emotionally? Does it diminish our soul? Does it make it angry towards someone? And I'm not just talking about the big things like the George Floyds and I'm talking about everything from the macro to the major. That is, we take any little thing and explode it to be something so horrendous and so negative, it can become our own crusade.
Yeah. It's so easy to draw the stereotypes when people are different religions or different races, because there's a definite defining mark, to say that this person's different because of this. But we do that to people who are our same race, our same faith.
We do, that's true.
But it doesn't get as much knowledge, or people don't really notice it. But I've been noticing it more and more because of all the recent events that have occurred. And I think about, my journey, through my experiences, and I've just seen so many examples that it's just human nature to do that. And how do you bring that to people's attention, and how do you get them to understand that that's not right to do that, no matter what the other person looks like, where the other person comes from? It's just not right to treat them, to allow that evil person to come out, allow that ego to get the best of you.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, when you're saying it's in our nature, it's in human nature, are you saying evil is in our human nature, or are you saying something else?
No, the evil part of us. I mean, it can come out in a lot of different ways. I think, if somebody looks like me and thinks like me, it's less likely to come out. But as soon as you have different values, that difference in what their values are can bring up anger inside of you. And I think we talked about this last time, and I think I said it, and you brought this up again, Sue. The anger, was a normal emotion. And so, but what are we doing with that anger? If the person looks a lot like me and I really care for this person, maybe I won't act out on that anger. But if the person looks very different from me, or somebody I never have really liked in the past, or whatever reason, I may not be able to contain that anger as quickly. And so to me, that is what you would call the root cause of all of this unrest that is going on now, because we just really don't know how to handle when those angry feelings come up.
Well, Viktor Frankl gave a illustration with he and his daughter, and his daughter, or he told his daughter had been sick and she was recovering, and he told his daughter, he says, well, we need to thank the good Lord for healing you. And his daughter said, why? Don't forget, God's the one that gave it to me to start with.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's there. Sometimes it's the way we misuse our bodies and our talents and our so forth that causes that sickness.
Don't forget,
to come in.
You said, I missed something. You said, don't forget.
Don't forget, God's the one that gave it to me to start with.
Oh, okay.
God's the one who gave it to me, one to start with.
And so, I mean, there's, not that there can be any kind of an answer here, but it's looking at the fact that it is a part of life, and it is a part of our own very nature, that if we, can become so angry. And I mean, even in families, you have a tendency to label people. There's the smart one and the dumb one.
Yeah.
And the dumb one can become angry and want to off the smart one. And the thing of it is as we begin to buy into those labels that are put on us, and we have that option of buying into them or not buying into them. And all too often, the one that sticks that dumb one's label on their head refuses to learn because they got to prove themselves to be dumb. And many times the one that's labeled the smart one, you know what? They go through stress their whole life because
Right,
they're
because
the
it's
smart one.
smart.
And they can't ever not be smart. They can't ever do anything dumb. And we just so hurt ourselves and we so hurt others. And as we learn to, Frankl talked about the triad of tragedies and overcoming that, as we learn to turn suffering into a human accomplishment. And whether that suffering is that bruised ego. As you know, one time whenever I said this before, but I was having a conversation between me and God or me or whomever. But anyway, I knew that I needed to apologize for someone for my attitude, not my words, but my attitude, because it had been less than kind and been speaking. And I was thinking about it, and myself talked to me and said, well, you have a choice. You can either step down off of your high horse or I'll knock you off. And we always have that option. We always have that option. But often it's that ego that will not allow us to take it.
Right.
And I don't remember where I saw this, but I thought it was so cute. It says that even the dragon quits breathing fire when he's hugged.
Oh.
And it goes back to the fact that a little bit of kindness.
Oh, kindness, yes. It goes a long way. It goes a long
And it's
way.
within us, even when we don't want to shoo a fly away from a murderous person that had hurt, killed, shot, set fire to so many people. To have the human compassion and to do it without even realizing that there was a compassion there. That we can get in touch with that and begin to realize that we can turn that human suffering into a human achievement. And we can, and his second point in the tragic triad of Frankl was to derive from guilt, whether it's our guilt of what I did wrong, or whether it's the guilt that we have over hating someone else that did wrong, to derive from guilt a challenge to better ourselves.
Mm.
And when we're guilty, acknowledge and say, yeah, I'm guilty. I know on the news this morning, there was an advertisement for the Black Lives Matter, and it was saying, I don't know exactly, but the gist that I got from the advertisement was, be willing to acknowledge your own biases. You know, as long as we say, no, I don't think that. No, I'm not that way. No, I can't do that. No, or, you know, we're not ever going to get it done. Back to old Henry Ford. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
You're right.
You're right, because we have been given that gift inside of us, no matter what our skin color is, no matter what our nationality is, no matter what our background is. Because it's now, it's today. You asked a couple of weeks ago, you said, well, what does this now mean? Well, you know, I've been thinking about that. Now means it is what it is. Every second is now. And it's what's going on now. And then the third thing in the overcoming the tragedies is deriving from life's transitoriness, the insensitive and, you know, all the changes and all the insensitives, to take responsible actions. To be one that steps up to bat and owns up, or if you don't even have anything to own up to, says, you know what, I could help. I can do something.
I can do something about it.
Yeah.
What was that third one again? Could you repeat that, Mona?
Which one? The three?
The third
Yeah,
one.
derive from life's transitoriness.
Okay. Derive from life's transitoriness and incentive to take responsible action. For all the changes that happen, to look at them. We can dislike them, but they are what they are.
It is what
and
it
to
is.
take them and to let that be an incentive for us to be responsible, for us to be kind, for us to be
And to do something that's part of the solution when you talk
Yeah.
about doing something.
And
I can think of a
sometimes-
big, I can think of a big instances that turn suffering into human accomplishment.
Well, Alice, I'm gonna
what-
stop you right there because we'll pick that up when we turn off the recording. But
Oh,
we're over
well-
time for right
Sorry.
now. So thank you, Mona, for the.
We are running over, but I do want to close with this.
Okay. Okay. So you
Okay.
hang in there, Alice. Okay. We'll get you. As
Yeah,
soon as
hang in there,
close.
hang in there. And it is love and justice are not. I need to put my glasses on. It goes really, really well with this. Love and justice are not two. Without inner change, there can be no outer change. Without collective change, no change matters. May all beings be granted with the strength, determination, and wisdom to extinguish anger and reject violence as a way. May the suffering cease, and may I seek, find, and fully realize the love and compassion that already lives within me, and allow them to inspire and permeate my every action. And that was written by Angel Coyote.
Good words to end with. Thank you, Mona. Thanks, everybody. And we hope to see you again next week for another
There you go.
edition of Greet the Week. Thank
Thanks a
you.
lot. Bye.